Let me say this before we begin. I really hope that any comments that this video gets doesn't reference anything about pancakes. Yeah, I know, I am aware of the Akechi pancake thing, and I would really like to keep it out of this series. Please. Not that I have anything against it, but just please don't mention it. Anyways, let's see how the cliffhanger was resolved. Akechi's aim was flawless. The bullet struck Akira's forehead, just above the eyes. It then pinched off his bare skin with a sound like a surprise piano chord, and buried itself harmlessly in the adjacent wall. Oh, there's a Persona 5 alternate ending for you. Instead of a cognitive double getting shot... Oh, sorry, spoiler. Instead of Ren's cognitive double getting shot, his forehead is made of iron and the bullet just bounces off into the wall, and everyone's like, what? Moving on. The silence that followed was somewhat meditative. Akira sighed and holstered his gun. I saw that coming. Akechi's face had, very briefly, lit up in triumph when he'd pulled the trigger. Now it had curled into something difficult to describe. A mix between incredulity and dread. Like someone who just uncovered a lit stick of dynamite too late to get away from the bang. Don't know why you're surprised, Akira said. When has trying to kill me ever worked out for you? In lieu of a response, Akechi shot him again, this time in the chest. The bullet once again ricocheted off. When you decided to, well, go your own way after we met in Shido's palace, I kept wondering if we'd meet again, Akira said. I spent some time mixing up Persona just in case. Want to say hi? Of course! Akira has a brand new persona! Superman! No wonder he's bulletproof! His mask turned blue, burned blue, and before Akechi loomed a mammoth form. Limbs thick as tree trunks, eyes a pair of cobalt slits, peering through a gold mask nearly half the size of Akechi himself. Intimidating as he was, the giant man didn't appear hostile. He merely stood in place with his massive hammer clasped in both hands, tilting his head at Akechi as one might look at a small and mildly amusing dog. The air around him seemed alive with latent electricity. Strands of Akechi's hair stood on end right through the fractures in his helmet. Akechi shot at him, more out of reflex than anything. The result was predictable. This bullet bounced right up into the ceiling. Then the man dissolved into embers, and there was only Akira, looking at him with the same faintly pitying expression. It's 4, by the way. That persona? 4. 4, Loki. You get the idea. 4 here probably wasn't the best candidate for what I wanted to do, but come on, you've got Loki and all. I couldn't resist the symbolism. He shrugged. Anyway, I'm not going to hurt you, and as long as I've got this mask, you can't hurt me. So put away the gun. Let's talk. I think we both have a lot of explaining to do. Slowly, Akechi holstered his pistol. Akira grinned. Cool. So you want to sit down somewhere, or... Before he could finish, Akechi snarled and went for his blade, that thin length of cruelly serrated steel, and then rushed at Akira and swung right at his neck. It bounced off like he just struck a concrete pillar. Akira's smile disappeared. Seriously, man? Didn't you hear what I just... Shut up! His words were slurred as if he could barely force them out through his anger, and he took one wild swing after another to no avail. The blade clanged off Akira's unmoving body like a ringing bell. Wipe that goddamn look off your face! Akechi shouted. Talk? Talk with you? Why aren't you dead? Why won't you die? You and your idiot friends are the reason I'm here to begin with! Akira raised his hand and the blade smacked harmlessly into his palm, and then he gripped it tight and shoved hard. Akechi was forced back into the wall with his sword in Akira's hands, those red eyes mere inches away. And while Akira's voice was still calm, his teeth were bared as he spoke. You know, it really pisses me off how you never listen whenever people talk. My idiot friends were ready to bring you with us before you locked them out, remember? Let go! Are you the one responsible? Mental shutdowns, psychotic breakdowns, now you're putting people into comas too? I said let me go! The visor on his helmet burst into flame, and Akira cringed and staggered back, squinting against that sudden light. When his vision cleared, Loki was there. That angular silhouette with its rippling zebra-striped skin. Faceless, but with the impression of a vicious smile underneath its blank visage. With one hand it took up the great gold blade Leviathan, and soundlessly pointed it at Akira. Akechi and his own sawtooth sword followed suit. I don't care how long it takes, Akechi said. I'll kill you. You're just a bad dream. I'll kill you. Back to the water like all the rest. Kill you. Kill you. Kill you! In the bowels of Shido's palace, when Akechi had called out Loki and used the persona's psychosis-inducing powers on his own mind, he'd been something like this. Limbs limp, voice guttural, his eyes bulging so far out of his skull it looked like they might burst from the pressure of his own rage-drugged blood. But this time, he'd gone berserk without even having to use Loki's eldritch pick-me-up. Something had slipped loose inside his head. If what he'd said was true, then he'd been in this place ever since the Phantom Thieves had left it behind in an engine room. Meanwhile, Akira had been here for hardly any time at all, and he'd already started talking to himself, stylishly or not. He couldn't blame Akechi for losing his senses, ineffectually homicidal though he may be. Negotiating his way out of this didn't seem likely. Nothing to do now but play along and hope Akechi got it out of his system. All right, he said, and spread his arms out. Hit me with your best shot, detective. The air whistled as both Akechi and Loki rushed and swung. But Akira wasn't there. He'd already hopped around and away, giving the persona a little wave with one red-gloved hand. Akechi snarled again and turned and swung, but Akira dodged, and dodged again when Loki gripped his own blade in both hands, and brought it down hard enough to gash the ground and make the whole lobby shake. Gold and silver, black and red, the swords flashed and sliced but missed their target every time. The Phantom Thief elusive as ever, infuriatingly casual, here leaning back just enough for a blade to miss his nose by a hair's breadth. Here skipping around, another wild chop with hands in pockets and a smirk on his face. It was like trying to cut fog. And with every missed hit, Akechi's already clumsy attacks went wilder. By the time Akira had taken the fight past the lobby and into the hall, casually pushing open a door to one theater and ducking inside, Akechi had started to swing his weapon less like a sword and more like a baseball bat. In the theater, the empty ranks of seats quietly watched as Akira weaned in and out of the glinting blades. Finally, he ran out of the room. He stood with his back to the empty white screen, empty-handed, straight-faced, and without a single scraggly hair out of place. Nowhere else to run, Akechi panted. Yep, You got me. He swung his blade up. Loki! The persona blurred forward and, with one mighty swing, bisected the projector screen and smashed the ground with such force that the impact kicked up a thick and fungal-smelling dust from the molded carpet and ceiling. It hung in the air and stuck to Akechi's face like lint. When the air cleared, Akira was nowhere to be seen. And there was a sound behind him. Applause. He turned and there was Akira, second row from the front, clapping his heart out. Yeah, live for the applause, applause, applause. Live for the applause, applause, live for the applause, applause, live for the way that you cheer and scream for me. Applause, applause, applause. Give me the thing that I love, turn the lights on, put your hands up, make 'em touch, make 'em touch. Fantastic show, was his verdict. The stakes were low and I didn't care for the star, but the passion on display? Undeniable. He stopped clapping. Then again, I'm not much of a critic. Ready to stop? Akechi's eye twitched. This time he couldn't even work out Loki's name when he called forth the persona. He just raised his head and unleashed a guttural scream into the ceiling. And there was Loki, back to his usual insouciant slouch upon Livatane's held, one clawed hand raised high. In his palm a coruscating sphere of prismatic light appeared, and pulsed and grew, filling the theater with a live wire sizzle, like a swarm of angry wasps. Akira straightened up in his chair. This was probably the one attack that not even 4 could completely defend against. It was also likely to bring the entire building down on them. Damn it! He brought his hand up to his mask. You're not making this easy, are... And then, both the light and the persona bearing it flickered like a candle flame, and vanished. Akira blinked and then relaxed, little by little. Hey, you finally calmed down. Perfect timing, too. If Loki had fired that one off, then we probably both would have been... Akechi? He was pressed against a bisected screen, his skin gone nearly as white as the screen itself, his jaw agape, his one visible pupil dilated pinprick tight. He didn't answer Akira. All that came out of his throat was a thin creak. Behind Akira, the theater door clanged shut. Someone was there. He turned around and saw an outline slumped in front of the theater's entrance, a shape turned fuzzy and indistinct by the gloomy air. It stood there like it was enjoying the show. He turned back to Akechi. Is that a shadow? Akechi was still riveted where he stood, but his head made a jerky little shake. It could have been a no. It could have been an errant twitch. His movements sludgy as if in a dream, Akira stood and walked up to the figure. As its features became clearer, the first thing he noticed was its height. The top of its head barely came up to his chest. The second was its filth. It was dressed somewhat like a phantom thief, coated and masked, but in the sorriest state imaginable. Its clothes layers of sepia rags so numerous and torn that it was difficult to tell where one garment began and the next ended. Its mask a jaundiced cloth draped over its head like a soiled doily. Through a single long tear in that fabric stared an eye dark and lusterless as an oil stain. Its feet were bare, and its hands were ungloved, and the skin of both was so pale it was almost blue, and shriveled from endless wet. Around its wrists were a pair of thick and rusted manacles joined by a length of chain. It clinked and jingled softly as the figure swayed in place. Hi there, Akira said, and found, to his surprise, that his voice was shaking. Did you get lost here too? What's your name? The figure jerked as if Akira had just roused it from sleep. That single eye lanced through him, and with that gaze came a chill that ran even deeper than Akira's bones. Even his persona seemed to cringe away from it. He glanced behind him again at Akechi's shivering, terrified form. Shit. The pistol came out, leveled at the figure's head. Akira fought to keep his hand steady. Paranoia syndrome, he said. It's because of you, isn't it? No answer from behind that mask at first. But just as Akira was about to fire off a warning shot, he heard its voice. Possibly male, but hard to tell. A thin and toneless rasp like a dead leaf blown across concrete. The stranger said, Come, Iago. Akira raised his arm against a burst of light and greasy flame, and when he lowered it, the sight of the apparition before him made him take a few hasty steps back. It resembled a normal man, but one grotesquely decayed. Its flesh the fish belly white of the long drowned, its finery drained of dye and hanging off in strips barnacled by clumps of mold. Instead of a face, it wore a marble mask, its blank and gentle smile worn nearly smooth by age and streaked with black rot. In one hand it clutched a saber, notched and rusted, borne aloft like a torch. In the other arm it held a book, a great grimoire with no visible title. The cover rippled and streaked black and blue and green, like it had lain at the bottom of a sewer for 100 years. The only real color about the persona was from its cravat, which was a searing caution tape yellow, the fabric holding a nauseating membranous sheen. I guess Iago could have looked worse. It could have been like a mutilated version of the red parrot Iago. Remember him from Disney's Aladdin? The Gilbert Gottfried parrot? He was funny. Really funny. Of course, I don't recall I've ever seen Aladdin. I've seen bits and pieces of it. I haven't seen the remake at all. And then there were the chains. The persona's body was festooned with them. They draped it like seaweed, seemingly bursting right through its flesh and shredding its clothes on the way. They clattered in chorus, trailing the floor, their links ancient and slicked with rust and slime. Akira glanced at his feet and saw the chains already drawing closer. They lengthened with every second. The stranger and the persona had their blank gazes fixed on some vague spot behind Akira. Neither of them appeared to be paying him any attention at all. Still, he couldn't pull the trigger. His arms felt locked in place. Akira, I think now would be a good time to grab Akechi and GTFO out of Dodge. Suddenly, arms grabbed him by the waist and threw him back, and then he was on the floor with Akechi sprawled atop him. A second later, a length of chain bull-whipped across the room with a piercing whistle, like someone blowing over a bottle top. The chain passed over his head and struck a glancing blow to the adjacent seat, and the chair was ripped right out of its moorings and went flying into the far wall. His and Akechi's heartbeats thundered right through their clothes as Akechi gripped him again and rolled, and as the world twisted around him, he saw the persona's rotted sword cleave the ground where they'd lain. And the cleft continued. The ground several feet forward tore open as though the edge extended further than the blade, and just as Akira opened his mouth to say that it was fine, for could handle the sword as well as he could handle the others, he felt a monstrous burning sting around his ankle as one of the chains wrapped around him and cinched tight, and hurled him straight into the back of the theater and through the broken screen. Akira burst through the projector and slammed it at the hard planks beyond, then thumped back to the ground, sprawled, aching, gasping for breath. That chain had gone through Four's protection as if it hadn't even been there, and its touch was cold. so cold it burned. So I guess you could say it was like a freezer burn. Sorry, continuing. It had only gripped him for a moment, and the pain was still like a ring of squirming fire beneath his skin. He could barely make it to his feet. He staggered out from behind the screen and back into the theater, and stood agape at what he saw. He'd only been taken out of the action for a few seconds, but already the theater was a nightmare of chains. The walls and floor and ceiling were alive with their centipedal writhing. The links clacked and chittered like a forest of locusts. Iago, that twisted persona, twitched and jerked spasmodically as the endless chains grew longer and longer. They erupted from his body like pus from innumerable wounds. Akechi and Loki stood alone in that nest, blades drawn and bearing down on Iago's saber. But as Akira watched Iago effortlessly fling their weapons away, But as Akira watched, Iago effortlessly flung their weapons away, and then darted forward and hacked Loki clean in two. What the flock? Akechi's persona burst into flame, and Akechi cried out and clutched his head, his blade falling into the massive chains. One of them held it up and snapped it in half with casual ease. The stranger, Iago's master, reacted to none of it. He stood with head bowed as if he'd fallen asleep on his feet. Iago just wrecked Loki's spit! So with that thing with Akechi, does that mean any damage done to their persona can transfer over to the user? Like in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure with the stand powers? Akechi turned and made a desperate lurching run for the back of the theater, and the chains came alive around him. They encircled his waist, his limbs, his neck, and snapped taut and pulled hard. And Akechi fell forward and grabbed at one of the seats and reached out a hand, grasping, drowning, and he let out an animal shriek that made Akira's hair stand on end. Help me! Please help me! Akira's mask burned blue. Ravage them! He growled. Yoshitsune! That old familiar feeling. The sensation of a piece of himself breaking loose and walking free. The persona manifested before him and took a calm step forward, pale and dark-haired and clad in that rusty armor. And when he swung his blade, it was little more than a glimmer. A shard of fragmented moonlight. Yoshitsune swung once and disappeared, and all the chains froze stiff as the air filled with a silky sharpening. Iago flourished his sword, and the blade burst with sparks as he deflected the attack. But all his chains burst apart, as if the warrior's single blow had made the very air grow razored fangs and bite down hard. Oh, yeah. I've yet to actually fuse Yoshitsune in Persona 5 Royal, but I'll think about it. I've seen YouTube videos of him in action, and he's quite powerful. Then, with quiet balletic grace, the wall started to slide apart. Then the ceiling. Akira looked up and saw a chunk of masonry about to fall on him. Oh hell, I overdid it. That was when Akechi grabbed him again and cried Loki's name, and the persona emerged and hacked away the floor beneath them both. They fell into darkness as the theater above collapsed. Akechi and Akira struck wet and carpeted ground, the hole they'd left behind filling with rubble. The dark here was absolute. Akira squeezed his eyes shut and opened them again, and it made no difference in what he saw. Good call, he said, wriggling out of Akechi's grip. Forgot this old place had a... Akechi's hand clamped tight over his mouth. Akira almost shouted before he realized why he'd been silenced. Overhead, The chains clicked. The sound grew closer. He remembered an old trick of his. He let his eyes focus just so, and the shadows in the room fell away. Through his third eye, he could see that the basement theater was even smaller than the one above, low-ceilinged and with only a dozen seats. And he saw the chains forcing their way in, through the hole Loki had cut. He turned around and saw more of them dangling from the fissure Iago had cut when he tried to bisect the two of them on the ground. Akira gave Akechi a gentle nudge. After a moment, Akechi took the hint and let Akira lead him through the dark. They padded over to the seats, and Akira squatted in one with his legs pulled up. An awkward imitation of Futaba. Akechi quickly patted him down, feeling out his posture, then nodded and followed suit. The chains draped across the ground. They slithered over to where Akira's and Akechi's feet would have been, had they made the fatal mistake of sitting down normally. Fishing line, spider's thread, in search of something warm and alive. After what felt like years, the jangle overhead stopped. Then the chains retracted all at once, fast enough to kick up sparks as they scraped across each other, their friction sounding off a cheated screech. Above, the theater door opened, then closed.